Convicted rapist and child sex offender Gerhard Ackerman has now been found guilty of over 700 counts of rape, child pornography, sex trafficking and sexual exploitation of children. Ackerman's trial started earlier this year after he was accused of running a child sex ring disguised as a massage parlour situated in the north of Johannesburg. The case had been postponed to the 18th of July, that's for sentencing. But for more on this story, we're joined by abuse recovery coach and founder of MatrixMen, Pelders, joins us in studio. Martin, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
You and I were saying off air, you know, it's such a horrific story. In fact, yesterday when the court was delivering this decision, we actually couldn't take it live just because of the extreme content of what the judge had to say about the things Gerhard Ackerman conspired to do against children and was involved in doing against these children. It's justice in one case, but it's one of how many?
Too many, and unfortunately we don't know the extent of what's happening. I think what's just been exposed is that South Africa has become now, besides being the rape capital and the GBV capital and the femicide capital, we are now the sex trafficking capital of the world. We have incredibly porous borders, and we just have this growing and growing and growing in this country. And as a proud South African, I don't see this as the legacy of my country. I would like to change that. But I think in this case, all compliments go to Judge Ismail Mohammed, who handled this with absolute, with a rod of iron. He's a very firm man, and fair man. He doesn't take any nonsense. But what to me is the most upsetting about this is that Ackerman was in fact on bail for similar cases in Alexander. And he then went to the High Court, and he then got given bail again. And a lot of these cases were perpetrated whilst he was out on bail. And we need to kind of look at that situation in South Africa. If somebody's on trial for a similar case, then we need to say, well, no bail in the next case. But unfortunately, because of our system, we're not allowed to raise the fact that he was actually on trial for a similar case in a different court.
That is possibly the most harrowing thing about cases involving violence against women and children, perhaps more so violence against children.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The fact that these perpetrators, and we've seen it many, many times before, children being found dead only for the perpetrator to be identified as someone who is out on bail.
Yeah.
So when we talk about the gaps in the system, that's one of the major gaps, surely.
Huge. It's huge, and we need to close this up. We need to... In fact, what we need is a law change, unfortunately. So, it was explained to me that Judge Mohammed has to see this person, Ackerman, as innocent before the court. So he's not allowed to be influenced by other factors, and that's one of the reasons. But I don't see the logic in that. If somebody's on trial for a case which is similar to the one that he's in this court for, why not bring it up? It's just not...
It sounds like it's a bank robbery.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. And I mean, the fact that is how many children did Ackerman impact on whilst he was out on bail from Alexander, and hurt and just destroy lives. Literally, that's what this sort of thing does. It destroys lives.
Martin, who would be the children who would be victims of someone like Ackerman?
Well, someone like Ackerman was posing as a guy who was running a massage parlour, and he was offering employment to all these young boys. And I no doubt that he was luring them in with the promise of relations or whatever the case may be with women. And of course, young boys are going to fall for that sort of thing. Yet when they get here and they find out, it's nothing like what they've been promised, of course. So Ackerman would go for the people who were coming from sort of slightly broken homes, maybe, struggling to find employment, low self-esteem, that sort of thing. And those would be the boys that he would target, boys that were desperate to kind of prove themselves in the world. And he would latch into them and start manipulating them. I mean, one of the boys, in fact, said no, he didn't want to, and Gerhard sort of coaxed him into just trying it once, and actually he ended up doing that. And so he lives with the embarrassment of having been victimized by a bunch of men as a young 17-year-old boy.
And of course, people like Gerhard Ackerman, perpetrators of these crimes against children, they know how to identify their victims, right?
Absolutely. You know, I mean, it was, you know, and firstly, thanks to the police in this particular case. The investigators were amazing. They did a really good job. And also the Department of Justice from the U.S. Embassy, who gave resources to the South African police, you know, in terms of forensic investigations and so on. And also WAMICA, the Women and Men Against Child Abuse, who raised awareness about what was happening here. But, yeah, sorry, I missed the question with all that.
The fact that Ackerman and perpetrators know how to identify
absolutely
their victims.
Yeah, they do. You know, when I looked at Ackerman and I said to one of the investigators, I said, he doesn't look like a very bright man. And he said, he might not be, but he knows his business. And that's what it is. I mean, that's all. He really wasn't, I mean, in some of the testimony he gave, I was shocked at how childish it actually was. You know, his justification for some of the stuff, and he's trying to explain his way out of, you know, other issues that the judge raised. I mean, it was really, really childish. It wasn't very intelligent at all. But he was just an incredible perpetrator. He knew his victims, and he was really, really good at what he did. I mean, hence the 730-plus charges.
So let's talk recovery now for the victims of Gerhard Ackerman and those who have been in cahoots with him.
Yes.
You know, what does the road to recovery look like for them?
Well, for the young boys, it's going to be talk, therapy. You know, it's the only way. The boys tend to think that they can do it on their own, but they can't. So it's finding a bunch of people who've been through similar incidents and just getting together and talking about it, and finding support in that network and that community of people who've been abused or have suffered abuse in their childhoods. And, yeah, it's painful. It's a process. It takes time, 3 to 5 years if you're really actively working on recovery. And but it is doable, definitely.
When we talk about the people who Gerhard Ackerman would have groomed these boys for, insofar as the case is concerned, there's the case against Gerhard Ackerman, but surely there's a wider investigation in terms of the people he was recruiting these boys for. Well,
this is one of the things that I'm looking at this case and going, what the hell? You know, I mean, we had acting judge Paul Kennedy who was involved with him. So an influential man, definitely has means, and not ugly by any means. And it kind of, I looked at his pictures and it puzzled me that why somebody like that had to actually pay for sex with young boys, you know. And it's just, yeah, and that network that Gerhard had, I mean, why aren't we investigating those people? Why aren't we bringing them in for investigation? We need to continue. Now we've got the kingpin, so-called, and he's in jail. Great, but what about the rest of them that got scot-free? They don't care about Ackerman. They're just going to move on to the next person who can provide the services that they want. We need to start talking about who's buying, especially when it comes to young boys and girls. Who's buying? And we need to start nailing those people. We really need to find ways to quell that desire to purchase sex from young children.
Yes,
I mean, it's
surely
disgusting.
there must be a wider net that's being cast there.
Absolutely, yes. We need to increase the investigative capacities of the South African police services. Unfortunately, they're working under tremendous strain because of resources, or a lack of resources. And we really need to say, look, if we're going to go for a kingpin, then we need to investigate further. We need to get his customers. We need to get other victims. I mean, at the very least, those other victims need support. They need counseling. They need, you know, encouragement and recovery and that sort of thing. Yeah.
So several things that need to be done now. The other victims, the road to recovery, and widening the net, even though they've received...
Absolutely.
They've now gotten the kingpin. Gerhard Ackerman, his case has been postponed to the 18th of July for sentencing. But Martin, thanks very much indeed for coming on. Such an important story. Martin Pelders is an abuse recovery coach and the founder of MatrixMen. As we continue to track that horrific story, 700 counts of rape, child pornography, sex trafficking, and the sexual exploitation of children.